What would you do if your neighbor called the cops on you for parking in your own driveway? I never thought something as simple as where I parked my car would lead to a full-blown neighborhood war. But that was before I met Walter Thompson, the self-proclaimed enforcer of our community. A man who thought his HOA title gave him power over everyone else, including me, a homeowner who wasn't even part of the HOA. It started like any normal morning. I pulled into my driveway, shut off the engine, and grabbed my coffee. My car was parked exactly where I always parked it, just a little closer to the edge than usual. Nothing major. I wasn't blocking anyone's access. I wasn't breaking any laws. But Walter had a different opinion. I heard him before I saw him, a sharp voice cutting through the air. "Hey! Move that damn car!" I turned and saw him standing in his front yard, his fists clenched, his face red with anger. His eyes were locked on my car like I had just committed a serious crime. I sighed. This wasn't the first time Walter had thrown a fit over nothing. He was the kind of neighbor who thought he ran the place. I figured if I ignored him, he'd stomp back inside and find something else to complain about. I was wrong. Walter didn't go inside. Instead, he pulled out his phone and, I kid you not, called the police. I blinked in disbelief. Was this really happening? I turned toward him, still standing there like some kind of authority figure, waiting for me to crumble. "You're calling the cops? Over a parking spot?" Walter scowled. "Absolutely. You can't just park like that. It's a hazard. You'll learn the hard way." I almost laughed. A hazard? The only hazard here was his blood pressure. But then, in the distance, I heard it, the unmistakable wail of sirens. I expected Walter to back down, to realize how ridiculous this was. Instead, his smug smile widened. The police were actually coming. Over my parked car. And somehow, I just knew, this was only the beginning. I stood there, gripping my coffee cup as the flashing red and blue lights rolled up to my house. This couldn't be real. Police officers, over a parked car? But there they were. The patrol car eased to a stop at the curb, and Officer Maria Sanchez stepped out. She was middle-aged, sharp-eyed, and had the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had seen it all. I could already tell that this wasn't her first time dealing with a neighborhood feud over something ridiculous. She barely glanced at me before walking straight toward Walter, who was already puffing out his chest like he had just caught me committing a felony. "Officer," he started, voice dripping with authority that wasn't his to wield, "I called because this man refuses to follow the community rules. He's blocking my driveway, creating a hazard, and I've had enough." I crossed my arms, shaking my head. "I'm not blocking anything. My car is on my property, not his." Officer Sanchez looked between us, then at my car. She didn't even need to take a second glance. "Sir," she said to Walter, her voice as even as possible, "your driveway is completely clear. His car is legally parked. I don't see a violation here." Walter's face turned red. He wasn't expecting that. "Well," he stammered, "maybe not this time, but this is part of a pattern. He keeps parking like this, ignoring the rules, and it's a bad example for the neighborhood." Officer Sanchez raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Sir, unless he's breaking a law, this isn't a police matter. If you have an issue, take it up with your HOA." That was all Walter needed to hear. I knew that look. That smug little glint in his eyes. The moment the officer left, Walter turned to me and sneered. "Fine. If the police won't do anything, the HOA will." I sighed, rubbing my temple. "Walter, I'm not even in the HOA." His smirk widened. ***, you don't have to be, ***. I didn't know what he meant at the time. But I would soon find out. The next morning, I stepped outside to find a letter taped to my windshield. My stomach dropped. It was from the HOA. Violation notice *** improper vehicle placement. Obstructing community access. Failure to comply may result in fines, ***. My blood boiled. I wasn't even in their stupid HOA. How could they find me? I stormed back inside, grabbed my laptop, and dug into the HOA bylaws. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. ***, there was nothing that gave them authority over non-members, ***. They had no right to enforce their rules on me. But when I called the HOA office, I was in for another surprise. Brad Whitman, the HOA's smug, overly polite representative, answered the phone. "Oh, Mr. Harrison. We've actually been expecting your call." "Yeah? Then you already know what I'm going to say. You can't find me. I'm not in the HOA, ***. There was a long pause. Then, he chuckled. "Well, technically speaking, you're correct. But as of last night, the HOA board voted to extend neighborhood compliance expectations to adjacent properties to protect the community aesthetic." I clenched my jaw. ***, you changed the rules overnight, ***. Community standards evolve, he said smoothly, and this is a necessary adjustment to ensure the neighborhood maintains its high property values. After all, we wouldn't want certain homeowners causing issues, would we? That's when I realized, ***, this was personal, ***. Walter had gone to the HOA and had them rewrite the rules just to go after me. I barely held back my anger. "I'm not paying a damn fine." Brad's voice remained sickeningly polite. "That's up to you, Mr. Harrison. But failure to comply will result in further action." I hung up. Walter had escalated the fight, and now, the entire HOA was in on it. I had two choices: roll over and comply, or fight back. I chose the latter. That night, I printed every parking regulation I could find, both in the HOA rules and in the city's bylaws, and I found something interesting. The HOA had no legal right to enforce rules on non-members. I showed up at the HOA office the next morning, violation notice in hand. The receptionist barely looked at me before buzzing the back office. A few minutes later, Brad Whitman strolled out, clipboard in hand. "Ah, Mr. Harrison," he greeted me with that same smug grin, "I assume you're here to discuss your recent violation?" I dropped my paperwork on the counter. "I'm here to tell you this fine is garbage. You don't have jurisdiction over my property, and I've got the laws to prove it." Brad barely glanced at my documents. "I understand your frustration, but our community rules are clear." No, they're not, ***, you made them up last night because Walter Thompson threw a tantrum. Brad's smile finally faltered. I pressed on. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to drop this complaint, or I'm going to take this straight to a lawyer. And when the city finds out you're trying to enforce illegal rules, I doubt it'll look good for the HOA." Brad exhaled sharply. I could tell he didn't like being challenged. "I'll have to bring this to the board," he said finally. "You do that," I said. "And while you're at it, tell Walter he's not going to bully me out of my own driveway." I turned and walked out, feeling a surge of satisfaction. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Walter wasn't the type to let things go. And if he couldn't win through the HOA, he'd find another way. I just didn't know how far he was willing to go. Not yet. The HOA hearing was packed. Word had spread fast. Neighbors filled every chair, whispering among themselves, some throwing curious glances at me. Normally, these meetings were dull, just a handful of board members discussing landscaping budgets and holiday decorations. Not this time. This time, the room buzzed with tension. This was no longer just about a parking dispute, this was about Walter Thompson's abuse of power and the HOA's corruption, and I was about to expose all of it. Walter sat at the front of the room, arms crossed, his face tight with barely contained rage. He was still smug, still convinced he had control. I had no doubt he thought this meeting was just a formality, another chance for him to flex his authority, have the board back him up, and bury me under more violations. But Walter didn't know what was coming. Margaret Peggy Henderson, the HOA president, called the meeting to order. Her tone was clipped, her eyes flicking between me and Walter like she already regretted being here. "We're here today to address the ongoing complaints between Mr. Harrison and Mr. Thompson," she began. "Mr. Thompson has submitted multiple reports regarding parking violations, neighborhood disruption, and vandalism." I nearly laughed. Walter had vandalized my property, and he was still trying to pin it on me. Margaret turned to me. "Mr. Harrison, do you have anything to say in response?" I stood, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. I didn't rush. I let the silence stretch just enough for the tension to thicken. Then, I pulled a stack of papers from my folder and set them on the table with a satisfying thump. "I have more than something to say," I replied. "I have proof." Walter shifted uncomfortably. I flipped to the first page. "Let's start with the vandalism accusations. I have security footage showing Walter trespassing on my property, kicking over my trash cans, spray painting my curb, and denting my mailbox." A ripple of murmurs moved through the crowd. I slid a USB drive across the table. I sent copies of this footage to my lawyer. "If anyone on this board cares about actual violations, you'll review it." Margaret blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Mr. Thompson, do you have a response to this?" Walter sat up straighter, trying to compose himself. "This is a gross mischaracterization," he said quickly. "I was cleaning up some litter." "Litter? With spray paint?" I cut in. "Because the footage is pretty clear. You were marking my curb like some self-appointed city worker. And as for cleaning up, last I checked, knocking over someone's trash cans isn't part of community beautification." A few neighbors chuckled. Walter's face burned red. I didn't stop. "Now, let's talk about the parking violations," I continued. "You and the HOA changed the rules overnight just to target me. But here's the problem, ***, you don't have legal authority over my property, ***. Another murmur spread through the room. I flipped to the next page, holding up a copy of the HOA's own bylaws. According to this document, the HOA only has jurisdiction over member properties. I am not a member. Therefore, your rules don't apply to me, and any fines issued against me are invalid." Margaret paled. I had them. Walter was losing control of the room, and he knew it. "The board has the right to enforce community standards," he snapped. "No, they don't." I slid another paper across the table. "This is a letter from my lawyer. If the HOA continues to harass me, we will be filing a formal complaint with the State Housing Commission and pursuing legal action for targeted harassment." The silence in the room was thick. I could see it happening, the shift. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Even Walter's closest ally, Linda Garvey, looked uncomfortable. Margaret cleared her throat. "We will, of course, need time to review these materials." I wasn't finished. I pulled out the final set of documents and placed them on the table. "You might also want to review your financial records while you're at it." Walter froze. The tension in the room doubled. I tapped the papers. "Because here's what I found, ***, questionable spending. Thousands of dollars misallocated to maintenance costs that don't seem to exist. Travel expenses billed to the HOA. Home renovations for someone's house conveniently listed under community improvements." Margaret's expression darkened. "What exactly are you suggesting?" I leaned forward, looking directly at Walter. "I'm suggesting that Walter has been using HOA funds for personal gain." The room exploded. People weren't whispering anymore, they were outright talking, some standing to get a better look at the documents. I caught snippets of conversation, asterisk asterisk, is this real? I knew something was off. We've been paying for his damn house? Walter wasn't smirking anymore, his mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Linda, looking pale, turned to Margaret. We need to audit this. Margaret nodded slowly, her face unreadable. Effective immediately, the board will launch a formal investigation into financial misconduct. Walter jumped to his feet. This is outrageous. This man is a troublemaker, and you're just going to take his word? Margaret sighed, rubbing her temples. Walter, sit down. For the first time since I moved in, Walter actually looked nervous. I sat back in my chair, feeling the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about a parking dispute anymore. Walter had spent years terrorizing this neighborhood, and now his power was crumbling. Margaret let out a breath and looked around the room. I moved to dismiss the complaints against Mr. Harrison pending review of all presented materials. A beat of silence. Then, asterisk asterisk, one by one, the board members raised their hands, asterisk asterisk. Margaret turned back to Walter. Until further notice, Walter, you are suspended from any decision-making authority in the HOA. Walter's face twisted with rage, but he had no fight left. I watched as the reality set in. He had lost. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. This was only the beginning of his downfall. And I was going to make damn sure he never held power over this neighborhood again. Walter never recovered. The investigation into his financial misconduct dragged on for weeks, but the outcome was inevitable. The HOA board found undeniable proof that he had been siphoning funds, falsified invoices, questionable maintenance projects, and thousands of dollars in expenses that had nothing to do with the community. Once the truth was exposed, the board had no choice but to strip him of all authority. He tried to fight it, of course. Claimed it was a misunderstanding. Blamed the accounting team. Said I had orchestrated a personal attack. But it didn't matter. The people in that neighborhood, the same ones who had feared him for years, weren't afraid anymore. They started coming forward with stories of their own. Walter had harassed elderly residents over incorrectly placed flower pots. He had threatened to fine a single mother for letting her kids draw chalk art on the sidewalk. He had even forced a veteran to repaint his house twice because the color didn't match Walter's vision for the community. And then, one morning, a for sale sign appeared in his yard. I saw him loading up a moving truck a few weeks later. He didn't say a word, didn't even look in my direction. Just packed up and left. I should have felt triumphant, and in some ways, I did. But the truth was, Walter was never the real problem. The entire system was broken. HOAs, the way they operated, their unchecked power, it wasn't just Walter. There would always be another one. Another petty dictator who thought their title gave them control over other people's lives. Another board member who cared more about rules than actual people. That's why, as soon as Walter left, I made a decision. I wasn't going to wait around for the next HOA tyrant to come along. I put my own house on the market and found a place far away from any HOA control. Somewhere I could finally live without wondering what nonsense rule would be thrown at me next. The day I moved out, I took one last look at Walter's now empty house. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just left. Because in the end, the best way to beat the HOA wasn't to fight their stupid rules. It was to leave them behind entirely. But that leaves me wondering, have you ever been caught in an HOA nightmare? Have you ever had to fight back against someone like Walter? Share your story below. Let's see who had it worse.